All right, everybody, welcome back. Let's now jump into part 3 of our 3-part series on Mahayana Buddhism's doctrine of spiritual cosmology. It's called Maitreya, the Buddha to Come, on Mahayana Buddhism's prophecy of the Messiah. So in this third section, we're going to culminate by going into how Maitreya fits into this larger spiritual worldview, and particularly how Maitreya interfaces with the destiny of mankind for our current age, and how Maitreya anticipates the future, the ideal the archetype that we need to orient our civilization toward realizing on the immediate scale. So on the short term, sort of next several decades type of shift that we need to be orienting ourselves to is to focus on the heart doctrine, going towards the Maitreya, cultivating individuals toward the release of Maitreya. Now, that's all in the language of Mahayana Buddhism. So these are all principles I'm referring to, states of consciousness, states of the human soul that are intended to be achieved and realized. So we call them in Mahayana Buddhism Maitreya or Amida or Avalokiteshvara. All these are representing principles. And mysteriously also beings, but transcendental beings, not individual persons. So just keep all that, make sure you keep all that in mind. So let's pick up. We're now at part 10, and this is called the heart doctrine, something that we've already introduced. As we've been covering in the first 2 parts of this 3-part article series, compassion is one of the keynotes of Mahayana Buddhism's wisdom teachings. Compassion is particularly associated with the Buddha Amitabha and his bodhisattva Avalokita. As Manly Hall describes it, compassion is the universal mood of wisdom. It is wisdom's emotional reflex, expressed in the form of a gentle, compassionate affection for the divinity that is locked within all incomplete growing forms. Compassion is affection expressed in terms of service. Once cultivated, it gently guides the individual beyond the state of pain or pleasure, where they forget the ego in the effort of serving an inner light. This light manifests emotionally through a spiritualized mood of compassion, where one feels deeply the infinite desire to bring all things to peace and reality. The mood of compassion is closely tied with the archetypal emotions involved with the bodhisattva's vow, which is the pledge that the fully realized soul makes at the moment of its great absorption into nirvana. As Hall tells us, compassion is the ideal of Buddhism. It is associated with the vow the great Buddhas took before the beginning of the world. It is the vow of the bodhisattvas as they stand at the threshold of liberation, the vow of the patriarchs and arhats, and it is the vow of every man who puts his foot upon the middle path. With this vow, the spiritual self pledges to refrain from the supreme reward it has earned of annihilation into universal consciousness, and instead offers itself and the perfected soul vehicle it has evolved to get to that point, so that the soul vehicle may be of service to the growing and evolving life form still struggling to grow upward here on earth. It is said that when the glorious Buddha Amitabha stood at the threshold of nirvana, he refused to enter into the great peace. Rather, he stopped, and in his heart, he took the vow that he would not accept for himself the reward of ageless bliss until every creature of all the world had received the law and the peace. Buddhism's ideal of compassion is closely tied to a humanistic idealism. We are not only meant to serve God, but we are meant to serve in particular our fellow man. As Manly Hall states, quote, "There should be no love but the love of man, no work but the service of man, and no rest from effort until all men have received the blessed consolation." This is the vow of Amida and the basis of the love compassion he emanates. Compassion, again quoting Manly Hall, compassion is the very plan by which all that exists is assured the fulfillment of its own destiny. It provides all beings with an infinite opportunity to unfold. So compassion is involved with, simultaneously with the experience of nirvana, with the afterlife state, and with the consciousness of Amida, and the mood of the Western paradise, his kingdom. and it's the basis of reincarnation, because the compassion aspect is what keeps the higher self repeatedly incarnating into the lower self so as to draw its lower self upward. It will never abandon that lower self, metaphorically speaking. So that's that compassion once again. So that's the end of part 10. Part 11, the Western Paradise of Amitabha. And in the article, I have a lot of pictures kind of littered about. So I have a very cool picture from one of Manly Hall's works on Mahayana Buddhism with, it's a picture of the afterlife state ruled by Amida and his bodhisattvas in there, shining a light and metaphorically feeding the souls in the world in this afterlife state. So it's really beautiful. Let's continue now. Amitabha's heart doctrine is the central system of religious philosophy emphasized by the Mahayana school. It is designed to stimulate and release within the self these higher emotional qualities associated with Amida and Avalokita. Those who practice Mahayana Buddhism as a religion rather than as a more demanding philosophy, but for those who are not ready for the philosophy and practice it just as a religion, in doing so, by participating in this doctrine, they're being subtly prepared to eventually practice it as a more advanced system of religious philosophy. So because the philosophical system is connected with an outer body linked to an inner body, and they have the intermediate schoolhouse in between, those in the outer body, by participating in this doctrine on the level that they're capable of, are gradually subtly ascended or subtly developed or evolved through this doctrine into a higher state of existence. So they will grow in the right direction during that lifetime, and then they'll set the stage for them to have a more fortunate reincarnation, where they'll have more opportunities to grow in future lifetimes. So the heart doctrine ensures the progression of the soul at whatever level that they're on. Even if one is not ready to become a philosopher, by simply following this system on the level of religion, the desired qualities of Amitabha are able to be stimulated on an unconscious level. Through this unconscious stimulation, the religious adherent to the Mahayana doctrine becomes subtly prepared to enter a blessed afterlife state in Sukhavati, while also being prepared to move into a more evolved state in their next incarnation, like we were just talking about. In this sense, the mythology surrounding Amitabha's after-death state is not wrong. Those who follow the doctrine's virtues are in fact rewarded in the form of having souls that are better able to attune themselves to Amida's consciousness during this afterlife state. And the attunement of one's consciousness to Amida's ray is what results in the experience of being in a fortunate afterlife state. Because at the end of the day, what's happening in the afterlife state is that you're moving from an objective state of existence and then moving inward into a pure subjective form. So you'll experience the pure subjective qualities of yourself in the type of dream state over the course of that afterlife period. And the quality of that dream state will be affected by the state of the consciousness or the state of the soul that you've developed so far in your lifetime. So it's the spiritual self that enters this afterlife state according to its own state of development. So the heart doctrine is designed to service this higher self and the growth of the higher self. And that serving manifests as an experience of Sukhavati, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, but the Pure Land, the experience of the Pure Land or the Western Paradise. Entry to this Pure Land is bestowed only to those who have allowed Amida's wisdom ray into their life to some degree during embodiment. Otherwise, in the afterlife state, their soul will remain asleep and unresponsive to it. So the ray always exists. The question is, have you opened yourself to it, and to what degree? Manly Hall explains that the Pure Land is built up within one's own psyche as a response to its reaction to world experience. The elevated quality of consciousness that Sukhavati personifies is one that is built in the subtle substances of thought and emotion, that's in Manly Hall's words. Consequently, one's own merits and karma build this Pure Land within the self, because it's psychological, like we were saying. So you build your own, You build your own psyche, and stimulation from the physical incarnation is what allows the psyche to build itself. So the psyche doesn't build itself in the same way during its afterlife state. It's more like that's the harvesting of the state that you've attained to at that point in time, and then each incarnation is the opportunity for growth and development and stimulation for the soul. As explained above, the aspect of the Mahayana system that pertains to achieving this blessed afterlife state is called the heart doctrine. The religious philosophy of Mahayana Buddhism is built around the heart doctrine, which is dedicated to the art and science of purifying one's thoughts, emotions, and actions, while also inspiring the individual to manifest the qualities of service, compassion, and mercy in their everyday lives. The heart doctrine is oriented around the practice of mindful prayer to Amida and Kuan Yin. It is based on the premise that by focusing one's meditation upon the qualities embodied by these spiritual beings, one creates a resonance that has a tangible effect in terms of purifying the soul. And then I have a couple pictures of Kuan Yin here. The practice of the doctrine, the heart doctrine, has a twofold effect. On one level, it has the effect of preparing the individual to live the type of life that will reward them in the afterlife state. As Manly Hall explains, through the practice of its religious observances, quote, the average person can improve the quality of his living, refine his emotions, and accept the greater responsibility for his actions. These are the virtues of the laity, or the common person, the person who hasn't pledged themselves fully to the philosophic path, but these are still virtues that can be cultivated. On the other hand, the Mahayana system will also prepare those who practice it as a religion for eventual entry, perhaps in a future life, into the more advanced levels of the Sangha's philosophical teachings. This it does by subtly initiating them into the core spiritual values and principles associated with the more advanced doctrines of meditation and yoga that are contained in the higher teachings. What is implied here is that our own mental and emotional intemperances and imbalances are what keep us rooted to the material state and away from entering the Pure Land during the afterlife cycle. If one's mental and emotional factors are not developed and put into balance while on Earth, then the sattva, or the self behind one's earthly personality, will continue to be plagued by them in the afterlife state. This will cause it to remain in an earth-oriented mode of consciousness and will consequently keep it asleep to its true solar selfhood. This inner or higher self is only capable of being experienced when one's consciousness has become detached from the obsessions and desires of material life. As the famous Buddhist saying goes, ignorance is the root of all suffering. Quote, it is the rebellion that leads to pain. If we earnestly desire the experience of inner peace, we must establish the principle of tranquility in the core of our psychic being. All negatives come from ignorance and lead only to its perpetuation. Thus, there is only ignorance and non-ignorance. But if one can transcend these earthly limitations by following the simple system of religious philosophy that the heart doctrine provides, then one can move one's sattva or center of self-consciousness past the confines of the earth and awaken instead its bodhi nature, or bodhisattvahood. This is the inner seed bodhisattva that exists at the center of each of our psyches, who is awaiting its lower personality to reach the level of maturity where we can embody its consciousness on this earthly sphere. The heart doctrine of Amitabha Buddhism is designed to put these factors in order and to bring mental and emotional extremes back to a middle equilibrium point. At the same time, it emphasizes the simple idealism of the bodhisattva, to serve, to awaken, and to enlighten. As a system of idealistic philosophy, Mahayana Buddhism is strongly humanistic, inspiring each individual to unfold themselves to the highest of their potential, while also dedicating themselves to the service of others and to the fulfillment of the divine plan that is destined for all things. Simply put, quote, the Buddhist concept of evolution is an effortless growth through the simple practices of the Dharma. Here, worship is through growth, and growth rewards itself. To grow is to reveal the perfect working of the law. That's a Manly Hall quote. This approach to spiritual unfoldment is premised upon the philosophy of via negativa, which is the act of regaining health by removing harm. As Manly Hall explains, sins against the soul are corrected by the cultivation of moral virtues and the righting of wrongs caused by selfishness and dishonesty. In other words, negative karma can be transmuted by the power of love, making love a force of divine salvation in the world. In this way, the heart doctrine is oriented around the notion that salvation is possible through the complete trust in the love of Amida. This process of saving one's soul represents the act of bringing their wayward soul back into harmony with the divine plan. With the heart doctrine, salvation is promised, but it must be earned. There is no easy believing or vicarious atonement. As Manly Hall explains, this is a quote, "The laws of reincarnation and karma force the problem of salvation upon the individual himself. His place in the plan is determined entirely by merit, which is gained by obedience to the laws of the brotherhood, by the practice of the virtues, and by the internal meditation upon the mystery of liberation. Through these disciplines, the individual emerges as the complete master of his own destiny." In sum, the steps of the heart doctrine are simple and straightforward. To follow them is to walk in the path of the Bodhisattva. First, one must develop a sincere faith in the Mahayana doctrine or in an esoteric doctrine of comparable standard, one whose religious mythology is specifically designed to fit within a psychological archetype. This correspondence in religious imagery is necessary as it establishes a sympathy or bond of connection between the believer and the object of belief. Second, one must live the life and practice the way of good works. This step embodies the act of obeyance. One obeys by serving. Through service, one gains the stimulation necessary for self-evolution to be catalyzed. Third, teach by example. Plant the seed of the lotus of the law in others by living a life that embodies the doctrine. Those are the 3 steps to the heart doctrine. And that concludes part 11. Part 12 I have actually split between 2, so I have 12A and 12B. And the reason I did this because it was getting kind of long, but it's all on the same topic. It just kind of evolves into 2 kind of more complex ways, or it evolves into a few different complex ways of talking about one topic. So anyway, this number 12A is called The Teacher, the Doctrine, and the School. In Mahayana Buddhism, we find an inspiring philosophy that is simultaneously spiritual, humanistic, and practical. Manly Hall writes, "The Buddhist identifies their God principle with a superhuman termed, quote, the perfectly enlightened one, with serenity of spirit and complete internal and eternal composure. There is no pain or stress in the meditating form of the great teacher. He is free from all conflict arising from illusion." He continues, "Amitabha is an elder brother, a guide and counselor, one unselfishly dedicated to our need because of the greatness of his own heart. He personifies man as the enlightener of man, the redeemer of man, and the dedicated servant to the needs of man. He is that man of insight and compassion locked within each of us. He is the symbol of that quality of perfection that is uniquely possible for the human. The consciousness of Amitabha flows forth through the celestial bodhisattva Avalokita, where it is centered within the being of the Manushi Buddha or human Buddha, as we discussed earlier. So now we're talking about 3 levels. We have Amitabha as the supreme level, we have Avalokita at the solar level, and then we have now on the earth level the human Buddha. And these become the 3 carriers of the consciousness. And the human Buddha or the Manushi Buddha is also called the Manu. So I often will say the Manu. And I've referenced the Manu and the Rishis before. And in Buddhism, the Manu is the Manushi Buddha and the Rishis are the Bodhisattvas or the terrestrial Bodhisattvas. The Manushi Buddha takes in the 7 rays of the 7 celestial Bodhisattvas and manifests them into the planetary sphere, which is under his rulership. According to the Mahayana doctrine, the 4th and lowest plane of the solar system is the planet Earth, with the sun, the father star Vega, and the galaxy existing as the 3 worlds above it. The planet Earth is contained within the womb of the sun. The Earth is comprised of 7 planes, 1 for each of the rays, which ascend from a level of base materiality, which is the level that we exist on, to an apex of peak spirituality, which is the level that the Manushi Buddha exists on. The Manushi Buddha occupies the apex position of peak spirituality And the 7 terrestrial bodhisattvas who manifest as consciousness exist one plane below him. The human Buddha resides in the uppermost realm of the earth's 7 metaphysical auras, a realm that Buddhists term the Tushita heaven. The Manushi Buddha was born at the foundation of the solar system as a Vajrasattva formed from the 7 rays of the Adi Buddha of our system, Vega. He is the great human bodhisattva who is on his last incarnation before, quote, his final submergence for the salvation of the world, as Manly Hall puts it. This Manu, or Manushi Buddha, represents the perfect archetype of the human form, as it is destined to become at the final completion of its evolutionary cycle here on Earth. The Manushi Buddha manifests at the beginning of each of Earth's 7 cycles of evolutionary unfoldment, taking form as the racial Manu for each of the 7 root races. And we've discussed this racial Manu before with the Aryan revelations. So that represents the 5th generation of the Manu coming forth, the Aryan, because this is the 5th age that we're in, the 5th cycle. These 7 root races exist in correspondence with the 7 earth ages, with each root race evolving itself to completion over the course of one of the 7 ages. It is only at the fullness of all 7 ages that the complete archetype will be made manifest on Earth. Until then, it manifests in 6 relative states of ascending completion. Each of these states of relative perfection evolve over the 6 ages that precede the final manifestation of the Sabbath. I know I'm getting kind of accurate here with the words, but the Manushi Buddha is born at the beginning of the Earth as the point of intersection between the field that is to become the Earth and the solar field. And in each of the 7 ages, the Manushi Buddha manifests as the divine archetype over the human kingdom that is to evolve in that cycle, in that stage. So the root race, the 7 root races, and the Manu is the archetype for each root race. And it's the same Manu manifesting. And it's actually one line of bodhisattvas that he brings with him who manifest his 7 rays. They reincarnate across each of these 7 ages as well. So that's one line of spiritual teachers. And then together, they raise the first round of adepts to become like those rishis. So they become the first crop of humans from our life wave who were not bodhisattvas, who didn't come back from a previous wave as the bodhisattvas did, the terrestrial bodhisattvas. The adepts that they raise become the embodiment of the archetype, but they're raised from our cohort of souls. So they rise to the estate of the bodhisattva, and indeed they will become bodhisattvas in the next cycle. So they repeat the archetype. So this is the way that the ladder, the spiritual ladder towards complete enlightenment works. When you factor in the bodhisattva path, the idea that once you attain to a state of wholeness on one level, you come back and teach as a bodhisattva before you attain the full annihilation into that higher state that you've evolved into through the course of your evolution. So the course of evolution is to continuously move from an individual state to a universal state. And the bodhisattva path is this intermediary realm at the cusp of renouncing one's individuality. You come back as a bodhisattva. And that's the final sattva state. And then after that, you go into a state of universality. Your consciousness is universalized. So as I was saying, the Manushi Buddha manifests at the beginning of each of Earth's 7 cycles of evolutionary unfoldment, taking form as the racial Manu for each of the 7 root races. These 7 root races exist in correspondence with the 7 Earth ages, with each root race evolving itself to completion over the course of one of Earth's 7 ages. It is only at the fullness of all 7 ages that the complete archetype will be made manifest on Earth. Until then, it manifests in 6 relative states of ascending completion. Each of these states of relative perfection evolve over the 6 ages that precede the final manifestation of the 7th age, which is the Sabbath. For the 5th age, which is our age, the Manushi Buddha incarnated as the Aryan Madhu. So the archetype of humanity incarnated at the onset of the current age to establish the archetype of the age, and that's the Aryan Manu. And this is a story that we tracked. All humans today are children of this Manu and of his bodhisattvas. He embodies the evolution of mankind after Atlantis. All humans today fall into this category, no matter their ethnicity. So if you're not Atlantean and you're not Lemurian, then you must be Aryan. What else could you be? Are you a sixth root race human, in which case you're blue and exist in an abstract state of super consciousness? I don't think so. So everybody, no matter what your skin color is, if you're a modern human, anatomically modern human with a modern psychology, then you're an Aryan. Or you're more specifically not an Aryan, because that's the caste of priests who founded this pattern. You're a child of the Arya, and you have within you that Aryan archetype. So this is not about skin color, ethnicity. It's a psychological concept, and the psychological concept contains within it a spiritual concept that transcends race. So and the psychological concept ultimately transcends race, because one of the points I was making in the Atlantis zine at the very last section, if we can go back in time to that, it's that I had a whole section. I have several videos on the not videos, I have several episodes on the podcast about this as well, about the move from race to nation. Is that psychologically the current age begins with race, psychologically oriented within the confines of a racial pattern, and then it gradually evolves into nation. So go revisit those episodes, and you'll get a more detailed understanding about what Manly is talking about, going from race to nation. This is something that we'll deal with later in the series as well. This is very important, because again, we're transcending ethnicity as a dominant factor in human life, as we get away from the racial pattern into the national pattern. So a key aspect of getting beyond skin color and ethnicity and in terms of race is to understand psychology and the depth psychology angle that we talked about, because that's a binding, integrating concept. And we talk about the unconscious. Those are things that transcend. They're transpersonal, and they transcend skin color and race and individuality. But also having a little background in sociology is important, because I first got turned onto the idea that there was a transpersonal realm to human life through the concept of institutions, and really delving deep into the sociology of institutions. I realized that these are fundamentally collective structures, so there's a fundamentally collective aspect of human life, and then that realization marries very nicely with the realization of Carl Jung about the collective unconscious. So all right, so let's return to the narrative now. According to the doctrine of the Northern School, the historical personality who emerged from the present life wave to embody the ideal of the Aryan Manu through the ray of Avalokita was Gautama Buddha. Now notice the ray is important, because Gautama Buddha was not the only incarnation of the Manu, but he particularly represents the incarnation of the Manu through the ray of Avalokita. In truth, Gautama was not the only incarnation of the Manu in the age. Rather, he would have been the particular manifestation of the ray of Avalokita, while the other great sages and teachers of the age would have manifested the light of the other 6 celestial bodhisattvas. Gautama was also regarded as the fourth in a line, implying that he existed as the fourth incarnation of the original Aryan Manu associated with Atlantis' collapse. Given that we are now said to exist within the 5th subcycle of the current age, itself the 5th age in the overall cycle, we can now look forward to the incarnation of a future Manushi Buddha, one who will embody the wisdom of the 5th ray, that of the celestial Buddha Amoghasiddha and the Bodhisattva Visvapani. This future Manushi Buddha is given the term Maitreya. In each of his 7 incarnations, the Manushi Buddha embodies himself as a racial Manu. The consciousness of this Manu is manifest through 7 enlightened persons who are his 7 racial bodhisattvas. This one line of 7 teachers incarnates in each age to reveal the will of the racial Manu as it appears in each age for the race. These terrestrial bodhisattvas collectively embody and manifest the 7 rays into the evolving human life wave in each of the 7 ages of its evolutionary ascent. The racial bodhisattvas reincarnate in each age to become the first line of teachers who embody the archetype of the racial Manu for that age. They reincarnate in order to reveal the Manu's doctrine and to form a Sangha or school comprised of advanced members of the present life wave who have elevated themselves to become their initiates and disciples. As initiates, these advanced human souls are elevated by the bodhisattvas to become living representations of the bodhisattva ideal for that age. When the initiate evolves themselves to the point where they become a perfect expression of this ideal, they become the adept. Then they take on the task of raising 7 new initiates who rise to repeat the process. And in this way, the Sangha grows. Now, 12b, the racial bodhisattvas, the adepts, and the initiates. So we're going to go deeper into the structure of the Sangha. The racial bodhisattvas or rishis will not attain to the state of complete realization until the earth as a whole finishes its complete cycle of evolution. The first racial bodhisattvas were drawn from the archetype of the 7 rays, as it internally manifests within the being of the planet. The sun is their father, the earth is their mother. They reincarnate in each age to become the seed archetype for how that age's adept is to become embodied. So the adept is like a role, and each age has its own version of an adept, but the adept is the realization of the archetype for that evolutionary age. So the bodhisattvas manifest into, in our current age, the creation of the first Aryan adepts. And the Aryan adepts were that first caste of Aryans that we've been talking about. And they raised as their initiates the first caste of Aryan Brahmins. And these were the North Indian caste who maintained the wisdom teachings through the vehicle of the Vedas. And that's how the Vedas became the oldest scriptural writing in history, through this lineage. The path of humanity's evolution and the path of Earth's evolution are intimately connected. The latter attains to the fullness of its destiny through the evolutionary progression of the former, meaning the Earth attains to its destiny through humanity's perfection. The fully evolved human who brings the archetype of the bodhisattva self into a state of objective expression within the Earth is called the adept, as we just said. The adept is therefore the evolutionary fulfillment of the human soul's existence on Earth. Having initially incarnated as the 7 revealers of the Manu's doctrine, the 7 original bodhisattvas departed and left the responsibilities of terrestrial governance to the adepts and initiates they had raised. These new leaders establish and perpetuate the Sangha, or esoteric school, and continue to progress and evolve the legacy of the doctrine over the course of the age, bringing in new students and growing its dominion gradually. Leaving the dense plane of the physical earth behind, the souls of these enlightened humans ascend to join the Manu in the Tushita heaven, where they remain throughout the age. As Manly Hall explains, these Buddhas, looking down from the Tushita heaven into the dark abyss of matter, choose their bodies from such human types as are most suitable to the ministry. He continues, they are human beings belonging to the present life wave who have, by the extraordinary cultivation of their spiritual faculties and powers, become conscious instruments of the divine plan and the natural teachers of unenlightened humanity. They are said to dwell in retirement and frequently select remote places for their habitations. They have their disciples whom they instruct and are masters of the esoteric arts and sciences associated with their religious philosophies. So in the words of Theosophy, these would be the Mahatmas. When these racial bodhisattvas incarnated during the beginning of our age, they did so by oversouling advanced humans who had proved themselves worthy of advanced esoteric guidance. Having already evolved themselves past the need to incarnate here on Earth, These teachers reduce themselves to our levels as a voluntary sacrifice. They are bodhisattvas who continually come back in each age to show each root race the way forward toward completion. This they do by oversouling advanced students and initiates and working to make them the next generation of bodhisattvas and teachers. Once this new generation has been raised, then the cycle repeats once more with the raising up of a yet further generation. In this way, the bodhisattvas become the seeds of salvation for the creatures they are oversouling. They guide them toward the eventual attainment of the great release, which is to be accomplished by voluntary meditation. And then, once raised, the next generation takes the bodhisattva vow and perpetuates the cycle once more, further spreading the doctrine into the collective body of mankind, and thereby gradually raising, evolving, and bringing salvation to more and more humans desperately in need of it. The initial incarnation of the racial bodhisattvas came in the person of adepts, who are highly evolved persons who have developed their souls to become clear channels for the transmission of light between the hierarchy and the outer body of mankind still lost in darkness. The adepts and their initiates and their disciples, and some, the Sangha, serve as the institutional vehicle for the doctrine of salvation to be revealed to the collective body of mankind in each age. Adepts are humans of the present life wave who have elevated themselves to become objective realizations of the archetype that was first established for the race by the initial 7 racial bodhisattvas or rishis who incarnated in the Himavat long ago. Gautama Buddha personifies the adept in Buddhism. Jesus Christ personifies this archetype in Christianity, and Pythagoras and Plato personify it in the Greek lineage of philosophy. On the topic of adepts, Manly Hall writes, the adepts are servants of the Veda, i.e. the doctrine or the Dharma, and are the hands and feet of the great Lord. They serve as intermediaries between the law and the people. It is their duty to clothe the eternal truth in parables and fables, or to restate the doctrine on the levels of available understanding. He continues, adepts are required by the law of the Manu to guide the race without interfering with the right of the human being to learn through experience. The adepts must keep the universal laws and are servants rather than masters of the great plan. Adepts incarnate through their terrestrial institution, the Institutes of Manu, which itself is the progressed evolution of the original Atlantean mystery schools, who first taught the doctrine of the mystery of the dying God. The Sangha, or Esoteric school, embodies the doctrine, which is the framework of wisdom teachings originally imparted by the rishis in order that mankind may be instructed in the way of the Buddha. Philosophy externalizes this Sangha into the outer body of society, adding another level to it where more of the outer body of man can join and participate in its light. Through philosophy, the wisdom teachings are no longer arbitrarily constrained by the caste system. Instead, they are put into a form where it can move into a new institutional vehicle, which is the nation, as we just discussed. The cycle of the Arya that we've been tracking is built around this dynamic. It seeks to manifest into reality an archetypal ideal that already exists in an objective state through the highly evolved souls of certain spiritually enlightened persons. Our age is the Aryan age. Its dharma or destiny is built around the need for us to collectively manifest the seed archetype first established for us by the Aryan Manu and 7 racial bodhisattvas who incarnated at the beginning of the current age in the Himavat. The mission of the Arya is to evolve human civilization into an ultimate form or state that will perfectly embody the powers and potentials first set out for it by the Aryan fathers, who manifested this state of perfection as the initial seed archetypes of the race. The 7 racial bodhisattvas work to manifest the archetype of the Manu in each age. This they do by teaching his doctrine, which each does through the filter of the particular ray they are manifesting. The archetypal institution these fathers established was called the Institutes of Manu. This institution is comprised of 7 sub-institutes, each dedicated to the unfoldment of one of the 7 core wisdom principles of the 7 rays. Each bodhisattva establishes a Sangha comprised of an adept, his initiates, their disciples, and their outside students, who together work to manifest the archetype of the Manu into the collective body of mankind, a long-term objective they strategically pursue over the course of the age. The primary mechanism of human evolution targeted by this group is institution building. Descendants of the Sangha work to build mankind's institutions into a vehicle that will, in time, be capable of embodying the doctrine. So this is the great quest of global civilization, global government, is to build the institutions of man, the global institutions of government, into a form that can receive and embody the doctrine. The relationship between this esoteric institution and the outer body of mankind is one of initiate to disciple, so on a sociological level. Mankind as a whole is the neophyte, and the esoteric institution of the mysteries is the spiritual schoolhouse run by initiates. We are all enrolled in this schoolhouse, whether we realize it or not. In the West, the idea of initiation takes on a somewhat sinister tone, but in Buddhism it is treated as a natural part of their religious philosophy. Initiation being grounded in the idea that God is a great teacher and enlightener who saves man by illuminating him with wisdom and beauty. This illumination is accomplished through God's chosen terrestrial institution, the esoteric schools, i.e. the institutes of Manu, the mystery schools, and the adepts and initiates who comprise both. The adepts and initiates of the mysteries and esoteric schools are our initiators. They are actually those individuals from the present life wave who have risen beyond the rest to embody the archetype as initial ambassadors of its way. As elder brothers, they come back to show us the way forward, to bring us the doctrine of salvation through which we can attain to their same elevated estate. Remember, God is revered in Mahayana Buddhism primarily in the form of a universal man, a divine man, and a wise man. This divine man is the initiator. The human Buddha, who is the regent over the Tushita heaven, perfectly embodies within his being the entire doctrine of philosophy, which is, quote, the blood of Christ. He offers himself through these teachings to a developing mankind so that gradually over the course of ages, we may be enabled to gradually be elevated to attain to his sublime estate. As the archetype, he represents the ultimate standard against which all mortals are tested. In this way, he is the regent over man's evolution. He is the immovable constant against which all evolving variables are measured. As teacher and initiator, the Manushi Buddha forms the world into an objective representation of his own consciousness. The world becomes his fully evolved mental body or light body in its fully evolved state, in its final state, because in its ultimate state, the earth becomes a sun. In sum, the archetype of the racial Manu and his bodhisattvas is made manifest in our age through the trinity of adept, doctrine, and Sangha. Through these three elements, mankind is gradually molded into the form of the archetype. The Sangha is the institutional embodiment of the doctrine, while the adept is the individual who rises from the Sangha to perfectly embody it within his own soul. This adept becomes the regent over the school or Sangha, where he works primarily through a septenary of initiates, who in turn guide an outer hierarchy of disciples. On this, Manly Hall writes, occult philosophy teaches that the ancient wisdom was entrusted to the keeping of certain of the most highly evolved priests of the ancient world. These priests, as custodians of the secrets of life, set about to accomplish the gradual education of the human race, which they accomplished through the Sangha or esoteric school that they formed. By this, Mr. Hall is implying that the human race is to eventually form the body of the Sangha or assembly, implying that the doctrine or dharma is destined to one day be studied and practiced by every human. This is our spiritual destiny. The education of humanity is to be accomplished by means of the doctrine or dharma, which is the archetypal framework of esoteric philosophy, i.e. the wisdom teachings, that was first revealed by the terrestrial Manu and rishis of the present cycle. The seven rays of divine wisdom that stream from the seven celestial rishis are externalized as the seven disciplines of esoteric philosophy. In Mahayana Buddhism, these disciplines are lumped together and referenced as the doctrine, or the dharma. This doctrine is philosophy. Through it, we pass the inner psychological rituals of initiation. Through initiation, the psyche gradually releases itself from the attachments that bind the soul to earthly existence. Through philosophy, the initiate is prepared to successfully complete their initiations. Around this doctrine is built the Sangha or assembly, which is the human institution that emerges to embody these teachings. This is the ideal form of government. Hierarchy made manifest here on earth through the ideal institutional and organizational meta-design of civilization. This is the Sangha, and it is our destiny for human civilization on earth to be made in its image. And then finally, last chapter, Maitreya, the Buddha to come. As mentioned above, each racial bodhisattva incarnates through the person of one special individual who perfectly embodies its ray. Gautama Buddha was the fourth in the line of racial bodhisattvas who descended from the original Aryan Manu. He was an incarnation of the ray of Avalokita and Amida. Pythagoras, Lao Tzu, and the other sages of the period were also adepts serving as vehicles for the incarnation of the 6 other racial bodhisattvas. The world is currently awaiting its next round of racial bodhisattvas to incarnate. Collectively, these will form the being of the Maitreya Buddha, who Mahayana Buddhism prophesies as currently awaiting incarnation in the Tushita heaven or upper atmosphere of earth. The Tushita heaven, also called Shambhala, is located above the earth's 7 concentric auras, represented by the 7 planetary spheres of the ancient Ptolemaic system. As Manly Hall describes it, this holy city stands on the outer surface of the Empyrean, which is the zodiacal wall that forms the shell within which the developing embryo of the earth deity is being formed. In astronomical terms, this holy city exists at the north celestial pole of the sphere of fixed stars. Here, the region of Shambhala rules. This region is the divine man, the human Buddha, who personifies the seat of the universal intelligence on earth. The hands and feet of this region are the adepts, initiates, and disciples. Through them, the will of this region is made manifest on earth. Note that Maitreya Buddha will manifest not as one divine being, but rather as 7 racial bodhisattvas or adept initiates, who together will bring into objective manifestation Maitreya as a state of consciousness. These 7 initiates will together be elevated to embody the Maitreya, who here represents the incarnation of an adept. The consciousness personified by this adept is not to be monopolized by him, but rather distributed by him through his initiates into the Sangha, the outer body of disciples and students who together strive to embody and manifest his doctrine here on earth. The Sangha is to be the house of Maitreya, the human Buddha made manifest on earth through the persons of 7 adept initiates who will lead the 7 schools that will teach the 7 paths of the doctrine. In short, Maitreya is made incarnate through the Sangha and its adepts, initiates, and disciples. Maitreya is the human adept or human Buddha representing the 5th ray, the ray that is currently being developed in our present age of humanity. Those of the present life wave who will rise to embody the consciousness of this human bodhisattva will become the heroes of our age and will lead mankind to collectively and democratically complete the final stages of the utopian ideal of the new Atlantis. The attainment of the Maitreya ray requires the disciple to follow the way of the heart doctrine. This means that before Maitreya can be made manifest on earth, the Avalokita and Manjushri aspects of the initiate's soul must first be brought into equilibrium and full development. Once this happens, the adept emerges as the alchemist who can marry the solar and lunar principles within himself. They are then reborn to the Maitreya self within, meaning that the divine self or spiritual soul within them will now become an awakened instrument of Maitreya's consciousness here on earth. This ray will be added to the other 4 rays already made manifest here, so that the adept initiate who rises to embody Maitreya will, within their psyche, be capable of manifesting all 5 rays in perfect equilibrium, with the other 2 rays coming for the 6th and 7th root races that are to come. So these adept initiates will have to incarnate in these future stages to evolve and perfect the form. That's what separates the racial bodhisattva from the terrestrial bodhisattva, because the terrestrial bodhisattva represents the attainment of the archetype across all 7. So that comes first, and then out of those terrestrial bodhisattvas come the racial bodhisattvas, which incarnate in each age. As Manly Hall explains, the ray of Maitreya is particularly key to the experience of renunciation, which is the archetypal experience that makes the individual into a bodhisattva. This ray is currently being felt in the evolving body of humanity through the archetype of the faithful servant, one who is willing to sacrifice his own destiny to serve the ignorant and the needy. This is personified by, quote, the school teacher working with the young, and the old man sharing the wisdom of experience with his grandchildren. These are under the power of the Maitreya ray. This ray is given expression in those who never forget those who still sleep in the shadow of illusion and who turn back from the road of life to rescue and teach and inspire. Maitreya is born through the Sangha, with its doctrine of wisdom teachings representing the blood of Christ that raises and vivifies the consciousness of the assembly. In his classic Lectures on Ancient Philosophy, first published in 1927 when he was still in his 20s, Manly Hall first reveals the Mahayana Prophecy of the Maitreya. Here he gives the essential keynotes of the Maitreya prophecy, and with these words I conclude this article. Thank you for reading, and God bless. And now I'm going to read off this quote. In the Tashita heaven of the Buddhists dwells the radiant consciousness of Maitreya, the loving one, the desired of all nations, the Buddhist Messiah who is yet to come. This bodhisattva is the personification of man's hope of ultimate achievement. He signifies the eternal tomorrow, the time of all accomplishment. Robed in futurity, he is the consciousness of noble destiny. Maitreya gives a definite key to the worldwide belief in a coming savior whose advent will be marked by miracles and who shall lead his people to spiritual and temporal victory. Maitreya is the consciousness of hope, and he comes to those who can sense, even abstractly, the existence of a nobler and more illumined state. According to popular superstition, the advent of Maitreya, like the 10th avatar of Vishnu, will be a particular and definite occurrence. In reality, however, Maitreya is continually manifesting as the circumstances that leads worlds, nations, and individuals up along the path of the law to final absorption with the absolute. Maitreya saves the world by revealing to the world that it is capable of salvation. For out of the realization of possible perfection is born the hope and strength to persevere. Maitreya is therefore the embodiment of Dharma, or the doctrine, and he who accepts the law shall be saved by the law. Jesus, another personification of the law, assured his followers that those who believed in him should not perish. Maitreya is the way, the truth, and the life, which, coming to every life, redeems all who accept it. Amen.